This is a film we want to make in the series, which is about possibly the greatest Frenchman that has ever lived, or that's how he was billed at the time. He was murdered by de Gaulle, by all accounts, and all his assets were seized. And I mean, we're talking about the world's wealthiest man here, one of the world's wealthiest men. He owned factories in Acton, in New York. He owned them everywhere. Had half of Park Lane were dedicated to the showrooms for his cars. He was an extraordinary man, but he's unheard of in France now. And the reason he's unheard of is because de Gaulle put a block on any information coming out about him. Because obviously what had happened was his assets were used by de Gaulle to buy power in 1944. Nobody wanted de Gaulle, least of all the French resistance, because de Gaulle was a colonialist and they were all communists, most of them anyway. And so they didn't want him. So the only way he could get these resistance leaders on board was to give them, I mean, the managing director of Bianco Works in Paris was the head of the Parisian, became this managing director because he was head of the Parisian resistance. And the same went for lots of other factories all over France. So he bought the acquiescence of the resistance, who were his biggest adversaries. They hated him. But that's how he got power. And once he was in power, he consolidated that power and denied anybody finding any information about it from then on. No industrialist wanted to put his head above the parapet to say, I know Renault was innocent, he was a good man. He won the Legion of Honor in the First World War. He's not likely to renege on his patriotism in the Second World War. And we've got all the evidence for this, and I've been in touch with Renault, the directors of Renault, and it's a fascinating scenario, a fascinating idea about, they want the story told because he's the greatest Frenchman that ever lived, but the French aren't, he's not in the curriculum. The French don't learn about him, purely because of France's sacred cow. And this will make a wonderful documentary, and also because I know the owner of the Renault's house in Normandy, in Herqueville, on the banks of the Seine, beautiful house, which he built. And we could make a feature film based in that building. It had a cinema in it, and it's the first thermally heated, a ground thermally heated swimming pool. And he developed all these amazing innovations. He was a great inventor. In fact, Henry Ford called him the father of the motor car. He was the one that discovered the configuration that exists today. So we want to make a really good documentary which will chart his amazing successes, the tragic end, the injustice that was perpetrated on him and his family, of course, because they were denied all his assets. The state did recompense them in the late 50s, but a fraction of what his estate was worth. But we want to make a documentary about it, because I've got all the film and I've done a lot of the interviews and I've filmed all these properties all over France. I haven't done any, most of the properties now abroad don't exist, but I know of the huge factory he owned in Acton, and the showrooms he had in Park Lane, and the factories he had in America, all over America, because it was a big, his taxes were used to ferry the French army to the Battle of the Marne, just in 1914, when the Germans very nearly overran Paris in the First World War, and the only way to stop them was to commission, I think they commissioned 3,000 Renault taxis and took the whole of a regiment of soldiers up to this river crossing that the Germans were about to cross. So his taxes from then on were always known as the taxes of the Marne, because he was used for that. In fact, his lorries were used in the First World War as well to ferry all these tragic soldiers to Verdun, down the road that is still called the Voie de Sacrifice, which is sacrificial road. And that's an amazing story. And so 700,000 soldiers died who were never identified in that Battle of Verdun. It was the worst battle of the First World War. I mean, the most tragic loss of life. 700,000 men were blown to smithereens. There is a big building which is full of bone fragments. They couldn't identify nearly 1 million men because they reckon in some places a square metre of land received 10 tons of bombs. And this, we're talking about a square mile of battlefield. It was the most iniquitous slaughter the world has ever seen, the Battle of Verdun. And it was admitted by Frankenheim, the German general, that they wanted to bleed the French army dry. And that it was literally, that's how they approached that battle. And it's disgusting. Anyway, it's a fascinating subject. But Renault's vehicles were used a lot to ferry him around. But Renault also built engines for warships. He built railway carriages. This was a vast company. Yet Renault is unheard of in France now, and that's purely because of General de Gaulle. And it's a story that changed the world. It changed Europe. It changed the whole face of Europe by that murder in prison. Anyway, that's one subject that the feature film would be great, but the documentary is nearly complete. We've just got to finalise it and think about a feature film for a long-term thing. But it's a great thought, that particular one.